My name is Julian Vance, and I am a ghost. Not the kind that rattles chains, but the kind that is politely ignored at family gatherings. At 32, my life is a collection of things my family finds profoundly disappointing. A small, rent-controlled apartment overflowing with books, hands stained with archival ink instead of grease or dirt, and a career they can't brag about at their country club. I'm a historical cartographer and document analyst. To them, that means I'm a professional dust collector, a man who lives in the dead past because he has no future. They call me the Bookworm or the Archivist, and never with affection. What my family doesn't know is that the dusty, forgotten documents I handle are the ghosts that truly hold power. The faint lines on a 300-year-old map can be a multi-billion-dollar legal weapon. The watermark on a 17th-century land grant can rewrite the ownership of a city block. In my quiet, sun-drenched workshop, I am the man powerful people call when they need to prove the impossible. I am a whisper that can start an earthquake. Tonight, however, I was just Julian, the family footnote. We were gathered at Aura, the city's newest and most obnoxiously luxurious rooftop venue, to celebrate my older brother Alex. His real estate company, Vance Sterling Properties, had just broken ground on its most ambitious project yet, the Pinnacle, a skyscraper that would dominate the city's skyline. The project was the culmination of my father's ambition and my brother's ruthlessness, a monument to their shared vision of success. I stood near a towering glass wall, nursing a club soda, feeling as out of place as a rare manuscript in a bonfire. Alex was holding court, his arm around his fiancée, his voice booming over the curated jazz music. He was everything I wasn't, loud, slick, and polished to a blinding gleam. My father, Richard Vance, stood beside him, his chest puffed out with pride. He saw Alex as the continuation of his legacy. He saw me as a strange, scholarly detour. When it was time for toasts, my father raised his glass. "To my son Alex," he roared, the crowd cheering. "A man who builds the future, who looks forward, not back. He's putting our family name where it belongs, at the very top." His eyes briefly flickered to me, a subtle but clear jab. I was the one who looked back. Later, I approached Alex to give him my gift. While he had been receiving Rolexes and cases of vintage champagne, I had something different. It was a framed original 18th century map of the city's waterfront, the very land where the Pinnacle was now being built. I had spent weeks restoring it. It was a piece of the history he was building on. He unwrapped it with a performative curiosity. "Oh," he said, his smile tightening. "A map. How quaint." He held it up for his friends to see. My brother, the historian, still playing with old paper while we're busy building with steel and glass. A ripple of condescending laughter went through his circle. He handed the frame to an assistant without a second glance, as if it were a child's drawing. "Find a place for this in the archives," he said, the word dripping with mockery. The familiar, cold ache settled in my gut. It was the same ache I felt when my father told me my scholarship to study paleography was a waste of a good mind on a dead language. The same ache from every holiday dinner where my work was the butt of the joke, the strange hobby of the odd son. I had used the fee from my last job, authenticating a lost treaty for the Swiss government, to secretly cover the down payment on my mother's new car, letting her believe Alex had bought it for her. I was the silent benefactor, the invisible engine, and the designated failure all at once. I decided I'd had enough. Politeness had a limit, and mine had been eroded by years of quiet cuts. I turned to leave the party, to retreat back to my world of silent, honest paper. As I reached the exit, a different kind of presence cut through the noise. A woman was standing there, watching me. She was impeccably dressed in a dark, tailored suit, her demeanor radiating a calm, formidable authority that made everyone else in the room seem like they were just playing dress-up. She wasn't a guest. She was on a mission. My father and Alex noticed her too. I saw them start to move towards her, ready to greet what was clearly a person of immense importance. They assumed she was there for them. Everyone important was always there for them. But she didn't even look at them. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, were locked directly on me. She bypassed my father's outstretched hand and Alex's predatory smile as if they were statues. She walked directly to me, stopping a foot away. The ambient chatter of the party seemed to fade into a dull hum. She spoke, her voice low but carrying an undeniable weight. "Mr. Julian Vance?" I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. "My name is Isabella Rossi," she said. "I was told I could find you here. I represent a client with a significant historical claim. We need the one person who can read the silent maps." She paused, her gaze intense. "We need you to make a ghost speak." The phrase silent maps hung in the air between us, a code word in a language only I understood. It wasn't a term you'd find in any textbook. It was a hushed piece of jargon used in the highest echelons of historical litigation, referring to maps that held secrets not in what they showed, but in what they deliberately omitted or disguised. To hear it spoken here in this temple of modern greed was like finding a forgotten king's seal in a pile of junk mail. My father and Alex had frozen mid-stride, their faces a perfect picture of confusion. Their world was one of contracts, permits, and zoning laws, things you could bully or buy. This was something else entirely, an intrusion from a world they didn't know existed. I saw Alex's expression shift from confusion to suspicion, a cruel little smirk forming on his lips. He probably thought I was in some kind of trouble, perhaps caught dealing in forged antiques. The idea that I, the family failure, might be caught in a scandal seemed to be the only logical explanation for this woman's presence. "I'm sorry," my father said, stepping forward with an air of proprietary authority, "but my son is a scholar. I think you may have the wrong person. Our business is real estate." He gestured around the room, at the skyscraper mock-ups and the celebrating elite, as if that explained everything. Isabella Rossi didn't even turn her head. Her focus remained laser-sharp on me. "I assure you, Mr. Vance," she said, her tone polite but laced with steel, "I have the right person. The fate of a legacy that has been silent for 2 centuries depends on it." She held out a simple, elegant business card. It bore only her name, a phone number, and a single embossed symbol, a stylized raven holding a key. It was the crest of the Alatorre family, a name so old and powerful it was practically mythological. They were a dynasty of Spanish nobility whose influence had quietly shaped coastlines and capital cities across the Americas centuries ago, only to vanish from public life, their immense wealth dissolving into rumor and legend. I took the card, the weight of its implications settling on me. This wasn't just a job. This was the kind of work that made careers, or ended them. I glanced past her to my family. I saw the pure, uncomprehending shock on their faces. The name, Alatorre, meant nothing to them, but the woman's unyielding focus on me, the quiet intensity of her mission, was something their world of brute force negotiation couldn't process. They looked at me as if seeing me for the first time, a stranger in their midst. "It seems my expertise is required," I said, my voice steady, finding a strength I rarely used in their presence. I turned to my father and brother. "You see, some legacies aren't built with steel and glass. They're written in ink, and sometimes that ink bleeds through time." I gave them a small, tight smile. "Enjoy the party. It seems I have some ghosts to awaken." With that, I turned and walked away with Ms. Rossi, leaving my family standing amidst the glittering celebration of their future, suddenly confronted by a past they never knew had a voice. As we stepped into the private elevator, Ms. Rossi spoke again. "My client, Mr. Matteo Alatorre, the last direct descendant, is waiting. He believes your brother's project, the Pinnacle, is being built on land that was stolen from his family 200 years ago." The elevator doors slid shut and the sounds of the party vanished, replaced by a profound silence. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. The very foundation of my family's crowning achievement was being challenged by a ghost from the 18th century. "Stolen how?" I asked. "Through a fraudulent map and a falsified land grant," she replied, her eyes never leaving mine. "A document so skillfully forged that it has deceived historians and surveyors for generations. The original, true map, the silent map, is believed to have been destroyed. But Mr. Alatorre believes it, or a perfect copy, still exists, and he believes the man who created the forgery left a trail, a cartographer's signature hidden in plain sight for someone like you to find." The next day, I was in a place that felt more like home than my brother's rooftop party ever could, the Alatorre Private Archive. It was a climate-controlled vault in a discreet downtown heritage building, filled not with gold but with paper, vellum, parchment, and brittle, yellowed documents, each one a whisper from the past. Matteo Alatorre was an old man, with eyes that held the weight of his family's long, patient wait for justice. He had the quiet dignity of a king in exile. He and Ms. Rossi laid out dozens of documents on a large oak table. Brittle deeds, letters written in elegant, spidery script, and most importantly, the official city map from 1823, the one my family's claim was based on. It was the document that had erased the Alatorre name from the city's history. My ancestor Diego Alatorre was betrayed, Matteo said, his voice a low rumble, by a man he considered a friend, a rival who wanted his waterfront property. He created this. He pointed a trembling finger at the map. This lie. He hired the most skilled forger of the era to create a map that subtly shifted the boundary lines, redrawing the shoreline itself. He made it seem as if our land was nothing but worthless tidal marsh, while his was prime real estate. The forgery was accepted as official. My family was ruined, pushed to the margins. We have been fighting to correct this lie ever since. For the next 2 weeks I lived in that archive. I breathed the dust of centuries. I compared watermarks, analyzed ink composition, and studied the faint indentations left by a cartographer's stylus. My family tried to call. Alex left angry voicemails, demanding to know what scheme I was involved in. My father sent texts that were a mixture of threats and confused pleading. I ignored them all. I was on the hunt. The forger had been a genius. The paper was from the correct period, the ink chemically consistent. But he'd made one mistake. A forger can replicate a style, but he can't replicate a soul. The original cartographer of the city, a man named Thomas Croft, had a unique tell, a signature flourish he embedded in his work. He was a devout man, and in every one of his authentic maps, hidden within the intricate compass rose, was a tiny, almost invisible cross. I spent hours under a high-resolution digital microscope, scanning the compass rose on the fraudulent map. There was no cross. But the forger, in his arrogance, had left his own mark. Instead of a cross, hidden in the filigree of the northern point, was a tiny serpent eating its own tail, an Ouroboros. It was the personal mark of a notorious 19th century forger known only as Jormungandr. It was the crack in the foundation, the proof that the map was a fraud. But it wasn't enough. We had to find the true map, the silent map, to show what the boundaries should have been. I turned my attention to Jormungandr. Who was he? Who hired him? I dove into historical records, shipping manifests, and old correspondence. I found a clue in a series of letters between two merchants in 1823, complaining about a rival who had suddenly come into a great deal of money and was boasting of his new waterfront property. That rival's name was Silas Vance, my great-great-great-grandfather. The blood drained from my face. The betrayal wasn't just a historical footnote. The thief, the man who had ruined the Alatorre family, was my own ancestor. My family's entire fortune, the legacy my father and brother were so proud of, was built on a 200-year-old crime. The pinnacle wasn't a monument to their ambition. It was a tombstone on stolen ground, and I was the one who was about to dig it up. The name Silas Vance echoed in the silent archive, a ghost suddenly given my own family name. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. The meticulous charts, the faint ink lines, the entire history I had been piecing together suddenly became deeply, horribly personal. It wasn't just a case anymore. It was a reckoning. My ancestor, the founder of the Vance fortune, was a thief. The legacy my father worshipped and my brother was expanding upon with his grand skyscraper was built on a foundation of lies, a crime that had cast a shadow for 2 centuries. Matteo Alatorre and Isabella Rossi watched me, their expressions unreadable but patient. They must have suspected it. They had done their own research. They didn't hire me just for my skills. They hired me because I was a Vance. They needed me to be the one to unearth the truth, to make the verdict unimpeachable, a confession from within the family crypt. "Julian?" Isabella's voice was gentle, cutting through the roaring in my ears. "Are you all right?" I looked up from the letter, my hands feeling cold and numb. "Silas Vance," I said, the words tasting like ash. "He was my ancestor, the man who started it all." Matteo nodded slowly, his ancient eyes filled with a profound sadness rather than triumph. "We thought as much," he said. "History has a painful symmetry, does it not? The descendant of the wronged and the descendant of the wrongdoer brought together to finally balance the scales." The weight of that symmetry pressed down on me. For my entire life, I had been the family outcast because I chose to live in the past. They saw it as a weakness, a failure to be ambitious and forward-looking. But now that very past they disdained had risen up, and it was poised to devour their future. The irony was so sharp, it was almost suffocating. My resolve hardened. This was no longer just about historical accuracy or a client's claim. This was about justice. It was about severing the rot at the root of my own family tree. The insults, the condescension, the years of being treated as a failure, all of it was fuel now. They had called me the Archivist, the keeper of dead things. They had no idea that the dead were about to speak, and I was their chosen medium. Finding the forger's mark proves this map is fraudulent, I said, my voice gaining a new cold precision. But it doesn't prove what the true map looked like. We need Croft's original. We need the silent map. The search began anew, but this time it was a hunt for a shadow. If Silas Vance had commissioned a forgery, he would have needed the original to copy. What would he have done with it afterwards? Destroying it would be the logical choice, but men like Silas, arrogant and proud of their own cleverness, often kept trophies. He might have hidden it, a private monument to his own crime. I started digging into Silas's life. Not the sanitized version from the family biographies my father commissioned, but the raw data, his properties, his personal ledgers, his last will and testament. In his will, I found a strange bequest. Among the grand transfers of land and stock, there was a small, almost insignificant line item. To my darling wife, my collection of curiosities and atlases, housed in the library of our winter retreat at Blackwood Manor, to be preserved in my memory. Blackwood Manor. The name sent a jolt through me. It was the old family estate, a sprawling, Gothic mansion upstate that had been sold off 2 generations ago to pay for my grandfather's failed business ventures. It had since been donated to the state and turned into a local museum and historical society, a dusty, forgotten place nobody in the family had visited in decades. A library of old atlases, preserved in memory. It was too perfect. Isabella Rossi's resources were formidable. Within hours, she had secured us after-hours access to Blackwood Manor. We drove up that evening, the grand old house looming against the twilight sky like a skeletal beast. The local curator, a timid man named Mr. Abernathy, let us in, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe at the official documents Isabella presented. The library was exactly as I had imagined it. 2 stories of dark wood, smelling of leather and thyme, packed to the rafters with books. An entire section was dedicated to cartography. We spent hours carefully examining every atlas, every folio. We found dozens of maps by Thomas Croft, but not the one we were looking for. Hope began to wane as the clock ticked past midnight. Perhaps it was destroyed after all, Matteo said, his voice heavy with the familiar weight of disappointment. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were close. Silas was arrogant. He wouldn't have just hidden it in another book. He would have made it a centerpiece, hidden in plain sight. My eyes scanned the room, not looking at the shelves, but at the room itself. And then I saw it. Above the massive stone fireplace dominating the room was a huge, ornately framed map. It wasn't of our city. It was a grand, beautifully rendered map of the world from the 17th century. It was a stunning piece, the kind of thing one would display as art. But something was wrong with it. The frame. It was far too thick, too deep for a single sheet of vellum. It was almost a shadow box. My heart began to pound. "Mr. Abernathy," I said, my voice tight, "can we take that down?" He stammered, protesting that it was a priceless artifact, but Isabella's quiet, firm gaze was all the persuasion needed. With gloved hands, we carefully lifted the heavy frame from the wall and laid it on a large table. I examined the back. It was sealed with heavy paper and wax, but along the edge, I found what I was looking for, a hidden seam. With the delicate touch of a surgeon, I worked a thin blade into the seam and slowly, carefully pried the back panel away. Inside, nestled against the primary map, was another piece of vellum, rolled tightly and tied with a faded blue ribbon. My hands trembled as I untied the ribbon and gently unrolled the map. It was Thomas Croft's masterpiece, the waterfront of our city, as it was meant to be. The ink was still vibrant, the lines precise, and there, in the center of the ornate compass rose, was the tiny, perfect cross. The Alatorre family's land was clearly delineated, a vast and valuable tract of prime waterfront property. Our property, the land. The pinnacle was being built on was a small, insignificant parcel further inland. We had it. The ghost had spoken. The lie that had stood for 200 years was finally exposed. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Alex. "Dad's calling a family meeting tomorrow. Our lawyers are preparing a restraining order against you. Whatever game you're playing, it's over." I looked at the true map laid out before me, the silent, irrefutable proof of my family's crime. I texted back a single sentence. "No, Alex, the game is just beginning." The family meeting was held in the Lion's Den, the 40th floor conference room of Vance Sterling Properties, a sterile space of glass and steel that overlooked the entire city. From this height, the construction site of the pinnacle was clearly visible, a gaping wound in the earth, swarming with machinery. It was my father's throne room, designed to intimidate. As I walked in, the atmosphere was glacial. My father, Richard, sat at the head of the long marble table, his face a thunderous mask of rage. Alex was beside him, looking smug and predatory, flanked by two corporate lawyers who looked like they were carved from granite. They had expected me to come alone, tail between my legs. They were not prepared for me to be accompanied by Isabella Rossi and Matteo Alatorre. The moment they entered, the entire dynamic of the room shifted. My father's fury faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. Alex's smirk evaporated. They didn't know who Matteo was, but Isabella radiated an aura of power that their high-priced lawyers immediately recognized and respected. "What is the meaning of this, Julian?" my father boomed, recovering his composure. "Who are these people? You have been consorting with our competitors, trying to sabotage this project. Our lawyers have advised us to cut you off completely. You are no longer a part of this family or its interests. Your interests are built on a crime." I replied, my voice calm and steady. I placed a protective document case on the table. The air crackled with tension. "And this man," I said, gesturing to Matteo, "is the rightful owner of the land you're building on. His name is Matteo Alatorre." Alex let out a sharp, derisive laugh. "Alatorre? Never heard of him. Look, Julian, if this is some pathetic shakedown, you've severely miscalculated. Our title is clear. We've had our legal teams go over it a dozen times." "Your legal teams were looking at a forgery," I said, my gaze locking with his. "A very clever one, commissioned by our great-great-great-grandfather, Silas Vance, to steal this land from the Alatorre family." I opened the case and with deliberate slowness slid two documents across the polished marble table. One was a high-resolution photograph of the fraudulent map, with the forger's Ouroboros symbol circled in red. The other was the real map, Thomas Croft's silent map, in all its vindicating glory. My father and Alex stared at the maps, their faces draining of color. The lawyers leaned in, their professional skepticism warring with the undeniable evidence before their eyes. I could see the moment the truth dawned on one of them. His shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly. This is insane," my father stammered, his bravado crumbling. "Some old paper you dug up? It means nothing." "It means everything," Isabella Rossi said, her voice cutting through the room like a diamond blade. "We have the forger's mark. We have letters from Silas Vance discussing the problem of the Alatorre property. We have his personal ledgers showing a large, unexplained payment to a man only identified as J. And we have this, the original, authenticated royal land grant to the Alatorre family." She placed a final, heavy vellum document on the table. It was the keystone. "Your title, Mr. Vance, is built on sand, and the tide is coming in." Alex stared at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of hatred and horrified realization. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the raw panic of a man watching his world crumble. "You did this," he hissed, his voice trembling with fury. "You did this to us, your own family." "You were never my family," I retorted, the words coming out colder than I intended. "A family doesn't treat one of its own like a stain to be hidden. A family doesn't mock his passion, belittle his life's work, or use him as the butt of every joke. You saw me as a failure, a dusty footnote in your glorious story. Well, this footnote just rewrote the entire book." I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a near whisper, for him and my father alone. "You called me the Archivist. You were right, I keep the records, and the record shows that the entire Vance fortune is stolen property. Every country club membership, every luxury car, every brick you plan to lay in that tower, it's all fruit from a poisoned tree. My father looked like he had been struck by lightning. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The sheer scale of the disaster was finally crashing down on him. His legacy wasn't just threatened, it was an illusion. Isabella Rossi stood up, a model of professional grace. Mr. Alatorre is prepared to file an injunction to halt all construction on his property immediately. He will then begin legal proceedings to reclaim his ancestral land and seek damages for 2 centuries of illegal occupation and profit. Our case is, to put it mildly, ironclad. She paused, letting the finality of her words sink in. However, Mr. Alatorre is a reasonable man. He is willing to discuss a settlement. The word settlement hung in the air, a tiny, desperate lifeline. Alex seized it. "What kind of settlement?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Matteo Alatorre, who had been silent the entire time, finally spoke. His voice was soft, but it carried the weight of generations. "The price of justice is not something you can negotiate with money alone, Mr. Vance," he said, looking directly at my father. "You will issue a public formal apology to the Alatorre family. You will acknowledge the crime of your ancestor and the fraud upon which your family's name was built. You will fund the creation of a historical museum dedicated to the true history of this city's founding, with a wing dedicated to the Alatorre family's contribution. The land, of course, will be returned. As for monetary damages," he smiled, a thin, sad smile, "Ms. Rossi will be in touch with a figure. I assure you it will be significant." The terms were devastating. It wasn't just financial ruin, it was total public humiliation. It was the complete destruction of the Vance name, the very thing my father held more sacred than anything else. My father stared at me, his eyes pleading, filled with a despair I had never seen. In that moment, he wasn't the titan of industry. He was just an old man who had lost everything. "Julian, please," he whispered. "You can't." I looked at him, at the man who had dismissed my entire existence, who saw my life as a waste. I felt nothing. No pity, no triumph, just a quiet, clean emptiness. The closing of a book. "I didn't do this, Father," I said, standing to leave. "Silas Vance did this 200 years ago. All I did was turn on the light." I walked out of the room with Matteo and Isabella, not looking back, leaving my father and brother to suffocate in the ruins of their stolen empire. The aftermath was not a sudden explosive detonation, but a slow, crushing collapse. The injunction was filed the next morning. Work on the pinnacle screeched to a halt. The news broke a day later, and it was a media firestorm. The story was irresistible. A forgotten dynasty, a 200-year-old crime, and a modern real estate empire brought to its knees by a dusty map and the family's outcast son. The Vance name, once a symbol of power and success, became synonymous with fraud. My father and brother fought it, of course. For a few weeks, their lawyers tried to challenge the authenticity of the silent map, to bury us in motions and delays. But it was a fool's errand. Every expert we brought in, including some of the world's most renowned cartographers, confirmed my findings. The evidence was absolute. The media, smelling blood, dug into my family's past, unearthing every story of their ruthless business practices, painting a picture of a family whose arrogance had finally led to their downfall. The settlement negotiations were brutal. Isabella Rossi was relentless. The figure she presented was astronomical, calculated to reclaim not just the value of the land, but a significant portion of the profits the Vance family had accrued from it over generations. It was a sum designed to gut their empire, leaving just a hollowed-out shell. Vance Sterling Properties declared bankruptcy within a month. The pinnacle, half-finished, stood as a skeletal monument to their hubris. I received a call one evening from a number I didn't recognize. It was my mother. Her voice was quiet, strained. She had left my father. She was staying with her sister. "Julian," she began, and I could hear the years of unspoken things in her tone. "I saw the news. I read the articles." She paused. "All those years, I watched them treat you like you were less than. I never stood up for you. Not really. I let it happen. I was a coward." "You were just trying to keep the peace," I said, though the words felt inadequate. "There was no peace to keep," she replied, her voice cracking. "It was just a lie we all agreed to live in. I'm so sorry, Julian, for not seeing who you truly were. You were the strongest of all of us." Her apology was a balm on a wound I didn't know was still so raw. It was the one thing I hadn't expected, and the only thing that truly mattered. A few weeks later, I was back in the Alatore archive, helping Matteo plan the museum. The land had been officially signed over. The old man looked 10 years younger, the weight of his family's long struggle finally lifted. He had insisted on a clause in the settlement that I found particularly fitting. Blackwood Manor, the house my ancestor had built with his stolen wealth, was to be purchased from the state and deeded to a new historical trust, with me appointed as its lifetime chief curator. Silas's trophy room would now be my office. The symmetry was complete. My phone rang. It was Alex. His voice was unrecognizable, a thin, reedy whisper, stripped of all its former arrogance. "They're selling everything," he said, his voice hollow. "The houses, the cars, Dad's art collection. We're ruined. Are you happy now? Is this what you wanted?" I thought for a moment, looking at the ancient, honest maps surrounding me. "What I wanted, Alex, was for you to see me," I said quietly. "To see my work as something other than a joke. But you couldn't. You and Dad were so blinded by your own ambition you couldn't see the truth right in front of you. You built your future on a crime, and the past has a funny way of collecting its debts." "What am I supposed to do now?" he asked, the question filled with a pathetic, childlike helplessness. "I don't know," I replied honestly. "For the first time in your life, you'll have to build something on your own. Something real. Maybe you'll finally understand." I ended the call. There was nothing more to say. I stood up and walked to the window of the archive, looking out at the city. The skeletal frame of the pinnacle was still there, a dark silhouette against the setting sun. Soon it would be dismantled. In its place, Matteo Alatore planned to build not a skyscraper, but a public park in the museum, a space dedicated to truth and history, a place of quiet reflection where the Alatore name would finally be honored. For years, my family had called me the Bookworm, the Archivist, a man lost in the past. They thought my world was small and insignificant, a realm of dust and ghosts. They never understood that the past is never truly dead. It's just sleeping. And sometimes, it just needs the right person to wake it up. My hands were not stained with ink. They were stained with truth, and I had finally used it to clean the slate. The whispers of glory were not in the thunderous applause for my brother, but in the quiet, righteous vindication of a story finally being told correctly. The ghost had spoken, and everyone finally was listening.